start the recording. So basically everything falls under this like wilderness risk management umbrella. And so we spent the first couple of weeks looking at tools to manage environmental hazards like weather and near real-time satellite imagery and using Google Earth to like look for landslides and things. And and then that all gets built into some sort of route that can be shared like in Caltopo or Google Earth. And then we shift gears pretty heavily toward the human factor, and that's been the last segment. And so my approach in that has been to just try to offer a toolbox. Like, here's this thing I learned from somebody. Here's this other thing I learned, and some of it comes from aviation, some of it comes from the avalanche school, um,
Mhm.
and just sort of like here's tools that we can use to help manage like the decision making process and group dynamics. And so our interest in having you with us today is to learn about tools to put in that toolbox for all the human factor, for mental health,
Hmm.
for managing when things go wrong.
Great.
Um, yeah,
Awesome. That's so exciting.
yeah, this has been a great group too. It's been awesome.
Nice. Well, do you want me to do you go through people checking in for the day, or do you want me to launch in
I think
introducing myself?
I think we're ready to rock, and some folks will join in, and I'll let them in, and then I'll also sort of monitor chats and stuff, so you don't have to do that if there's any questions that come up. Um, and as and we, I like it when folks interrupt and help steer the conversation, and so is that a good fit for you?
Totally. And I was thinking that I would kind of introduce the concepts of stress continuum and some of the tools in the toolbox that I have worked with, and then open it up for questions and people asking. But I don't mind if people jump in while I'm talking at all. So it's great. I want to hear a discussion and certainly have it be an interactive dialogue. So
Cool. Yep,
yeah.
the model has been conversational. And I've got some questions for you that I want to know the answers to, but I'll want to give everybody else options too.
Okay.
So
Um,
if you'll start with tell us a little bit about yourself, and do that intro for us. Let's get started there.
yeah. So my name is Brooke Edwards, and I hail from Girdwood, Alaska. I've been a wilderness guide in both summers and winters for now 30 years. I started as a horsepacking guide in Wyoming and then have spent most of that time in Alaska, done a little bit of guiding in Antarctica and Japan. Um, Only came into like the ski guiding world via avalanche education maybe a decade ago, and added that. And through that many years of holding life or death decisions for other people in the wilderness, particularly in Alaska, where there's so many things that want to bite you, from grizzly bears to avalanches to earthquakes. You have to sleep with one eye open all the time. And what I discovered is it took me an acute stress injury, and I'll get into what stress injury is, but it took me acutely getting injured in my nervous system to then research and learn what nervous system injury was. And then I discovered that I had been chronically injuring myself for years. And so, what I want to bring forward to you today is it was such an aha moment for me to know and even put terminology towards what that means, that it was almost like a measure of grace that was gifted to me in understanding like how much I'd been through. Um, and I was able to take a breath and start working to heal myself. So, no matter if you're a recreationalist or you work in the industry, you have been working with the tools in Luke's toolbox on how to take all the different factors that you can research ahead of time, like weather and maps and everything, and plan your routes. But to know thyself, that human factor is the hardest part of the whole shebang. And it's actually the key to success and happiness in like the quality of your expeditions and on your team and with your friends and family, and for a longevity of exploration in this environment. So um, about 2 years ago, I stumbled across the Responder Alliance, and I started working for them part-time as their coordinator for basically all things winter for ski patrol, avalanche professionals, and guides as a central coordinator to begin to coordinate resilience teams. And so after a year and a half of working with them, I really expanded my knowledge of that. And so what I want to do first is share with you just 5 slides from the Responder Alliance, because I think it'll give us a common language then to be able to ask questions from. So if that's all right, I'll kind of walk us through that. And does anybody have any questions before I dive in there? Okay, I'm gonna share my screen, which we just figured out that we could do. Okay. Awesome. So on the screen, hopefully you can take a screenshot if you want. I just want to give you the website because there's lots of tools on there, and there is an online, if you join their base camp, it's almost like its own Facebook that is specifically for anybody, like from recreationalists to working in the industry, to be able to ask questions of all these things. And the way the Responder Alliance came at this is they thought, okay, we need to stop calling it mental health because it's actually our physical health. It's our nervous system that reacts, say, when something scary happens in the wilderness. You know, a grizzly bear runs at you and you have a near miss. And what happens is your whole fight, flight, fawn, or freeze is activated. And in our normal human physiology, sometimes we'll be in that activated state for 3 days. And that's totally normal. That's like how we were built. We were built to respond to the grizzly bear and be ready to fight it or run from it or freeze and play dead. That's designed into our biology. Now, what happens is if the grizzly bear keeps running at us or we keep repeating that in our mind, after 3 days, we can get stuck in that. Or if a number of like things happen, the grizzly bear runs at you, then you flip over your kayak, you know, then you're near hypothermic at your next camp. These like things add up like this until you're like kind of really frayed, right? And so what Laura McGladrey did, who started the Responder Alliance, she took the military model from the Vietnam era where they realized soldiers were coming back with PTSD, and they started seeing that the same symptoms were happening in police people and firefighters, and they were like, holy cow, this isn't just about going to war, this is about our natural human physiology, and look at all these occupations that this is happening in. And she was a ski patroller at the time and a therapist, and she was like, we need this in the ski industry. And so she took all these models and she adapted them from the US military and built them into this model. And in that, she was like, well, because we know this is going to happen to us, we know these are stressful jobs, can we build up our resilience ahead of time? Can we say like, okay, we know we're going on a wilderness expedition. What can I do to expand my bandwidth and expand my toolbox before going in? So she divided it up into these sustaining practices, which is there's 2 classes that are like, I call them preventative meds. So it's like building resilience in recognizing the stress in yourself. And then if you work on a team or say you're going on an expedition with a team, you'd want to do that with your team too. So you're sharing that common language. And then there's the other side of the spectrum. And one is like a during incident. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with like wilderness first responders as a medical course or some equivalent of that, of like medical courses that up your training to learn how to apply wilderness first aid when you're far away from help. And this idea is like there's psychological first aid that goes with that too. So, you know, say Luke flips over and is a lot of people go to save him, but I'm watching him and he's my dear friend. And everybody's focused on getting him out and taking care of him, and nobody's focused on me. And maybe I was there with him and I'm taking a lot of that on. Like I'm responsible. I let him into this. And I'm standing there like a deer in the headlights. Like psychological first aid is so that somebody recognizes that I'm a bystander who is being impacted and takes time to treat me and also treat the rescuer who is ever working on Luke. And then the preparing for major incidents is like, okay, if the worst case scenario happens and you get a really bad outcome, it's how do we follow that up? Used to be back in the day, the plane crashes and the chaplain comes in for an hour and says, I'm so sorry. If anybody needs a resource, I'm here. And then they leave and everyone goes to cope with it in their own way. And nobody ever talks about it again. It's a lot of old model is suck it up and deal, get back on the horse, stuff it down, drink it off. And so this is like trying to come at it from a healthy checklist of like, okay, what's normal and what's an activated nervous system? So this is the individual stress continuum. So it's really simple if you think about it in terms of colors. And what I recommend to people is like take a photo of this with your phone, um, and write these colors for yourself. Like these are great maybe symptoms, but your red might look different than my red. Your green might look different than my green. And so knowing for you what those spectrums are, and so that you, and maybe doing this with a partner or a best friend, so that it's a way to have a checklist on like, wow, what is going on for me? I'm really, um, I'm not able, I don't have any bandwidth. I think about it in terms of bandwidth. Like I wasn't able to give this talk on the day I was supposed to because a couple hours before this talk, I got a phone call from across the world that my best friend had been killed in an avalanche. And I was like, emailed Luke and was like, I'm way too much in the orange. Like I can't show up today. And I've taken these 2 weeks to like work myself back towards the green. And part of that was that like I was actually teaching avalanche classes for the last 2 weeks, and I was really honest and raw and vulnerable with my students to say, look, I'm in the orange. I just lost a friend in an avalanche, and now I have to teach you all about avalanches. That's terrifying to me. And I'm not all here, and I'm really fuzzy, and I need you all to look out for me. And I was crying on introducing myself. I mean, it was as raw and vulnerable as you could possibly show up in an authentic way. But I account the fact that I'm over in the green now is because I dared to invite them into my orange and say, I need help actually. Like I can't get to the green myself. Like, and by interacting with those students one-on-one who shared the times that they've been there, I like it slowly worked me back. That human interaction is part of what brings me green. So like now I'm able to talk to you all about it without feeling like from a reacted state. Like I feel well resourced. I've had chance to sleep. I've been really surrounded by good relationships. Um, and so it's not just knowing how you react in these colors, but it's also knowing what charges your battery and what drains your battery. So I make a little worksheet, and this would be good homework for you, is just make a little cartoon or like a little crayon drawing and put it on your fridge and do a worksheet of just like the battery, like what are the things that charge your battery? And then on the other side, what are the things that drain your battery? And these are things you could do mid-expedition. Say like you have a really stressful day in expedition, you might have a near miss. Maybe you take a down day the next day. Maybe everybody sleeps in. Maybe you play cards together. You know, you bring back laughter. There's something like if you know as a team what your battery recharge list is, then you can help draw each other. It's like throwing each other lifelines. I mean, like, Luke, I know that exercise is really important for you to get back to the green. So what can I do to hold space while you go get some exercise to get your battery recharged? Things like that. This is that psychological first response for rescue. It's very much designed exactly like the ABCs of CPR or wilderness medicine. And I love just even the patient. It's like assess, breathe, connect, direct, and empower. The ABCDE. And it's so not rocket surgery. It's so simple. It's as simple as like slowing down and asking Luke his name and like breathing calmly with him and talking calmly with him and maybe turning his back away from the chaos of the scene. And if he's able to, then like engaging him and helping so that he doesn't feel hopeless. And then I'm going to ask him who is a good friend of his, and I'm going to pass him off to his wife at the trailhead, and we're going to call her together. And so I pass him off to a higher level of care. I'm not just leaving him off in the weeds ignored, because they've proven that you can stop PTSD from formation if you give correct care during the event. So that's something to think about in there, and for the rescuers as well. And then these 3-3-3, again, we talked about that natural ramp up after 3 days. So this gives you just a real simple checklist of like 3 days after having a buddy that's like, does the stress continuum check-in, you do it on yourself. You're finding your ways to green, that you know, calling in your buddies and your teammates to like that self-partner awareness. And then the 3 weeks later, having somebody that is going to follow up with you. And there's a trauma stress questionnaire that is just a good check-in to see like where your nervous system is at. And it's things like, are you sleeping? Do you have reoccurring thoughts of the event? And if you score greater than 6, your increase of a stress injury developing is up. And then it's time to seek more professional level help. So this is just taking all the mystery out of it and taking the shame and blame game that we tend to do, and like all the ways that we were all raised with tough love or had hard coaches in our life that you're like, no, I'm just supposed to get back on the court. And it's like, it is this checklist. It gives you this like, no, this is a physical injury. You wouldn't tell somebody with a broken leg to just go out for a run. Like this is the equivalent. And so you have to check in and see if the broken leg is healing. Like, can you bear weight? Can you walk? And then that 3 months post incident is just making sure that like it's ops normal and coming back to that. And so there's like all these checklists that again take the mystery out of it, so that you would go through this traumatic stress questionnaire. And you can see that the things on there, it's like those, I mean, I'm sure all of us can identify with some point in our life where we were stuck by this and you're like jumping at just like a sound, or you're can't sleep because you're on that hamster wheel in your mind, and or you're really irritable and you can't explain why. That's all because your bandwidth it's like shell coring. It's going down to the basics, and your basic survival instincts, you're not feeling safe still. And so it's about getting you back to an island of safety. And so then this is the one, and these are all separate classes you can take online at the Responder Alliance too. And if you can't afford them, they have scholarships, they have other organizations with grants. They're developing a foundation, so they're not very expensive. They're like $100, and but you can get a scholarship to take these. If any one of these items is something that calls to you and you feel like you want to know more about, there's a whole online course for it. And so this incident support tool, is that whole training system that again has taken like place of the chaplain coming in for an hour after there's something really bad that goes down. And it's like it goes down and you actually score what happened in the incident with these scores, and you score your own reaction to it. And then if you come up with these different scores, it kind of tells you what your checklist is, what you need to do. So again, it stops you from having to suck it up and deal or play too tough or pretend like you're okay. It's basically making it okay to not be okay. So I'm going to exit out of that. And I just would love to hear from folks of like, that's just the introduction to that, and like how the tools can be used as preventative, as during action, and post action. And would love to hear questions from folks or dialogue around like, is this useful? Are you curious about it? Have you heard of it before? The colors.
Talk Tuck, it looks like you got something.
Um, I have a lot. That was awesome, and I'm really this is really really great and super helpful. Um, and I did miss the first 10 minutes. Um, but I'm really curious if you have any anecdotes about this being used practically. Because I think the, the disconnect for me and what you're saying and it's like, okay, okay, I get this, but like, how do I take that that slide and actually use it in a situation where I'm in an intense situation, everyone else is in an intense situation. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, how has this worked for you when you're like in the moment?
Yeah. Great question, Tuck. And I think it depends on which tool. Like again, it does help. Those online courses will give you like so many more like ways in which to engage with them. But a simple one for me, just with the stress continuum colors, is I'll use that just with my backcountry ski partners at the beginning of the day to be like, what color are we before we decide where we're going today? And so, people don't even have, I mean, usually my backcountry partners you can share everything with, but um, people don't have to share why. Like Luke could be like, well, I'm in the orange. And if he doesn't want to talk about why he's in the orange, that's okay. Still gives me information. And I'll be like, okay, well, I'm kind of in the yellow. It seems like maybe we shouldn't go for that big peak that we were talking about today. Like maybe it'd be good for us to do a little meadow skipping. Like it sounds like together as a team, we're not all systems firing go. So that's an example that I use all the time, and ski patrols all over and search and rescue teams are doing that as a team. They're just checking in as a color, and they're even putting it even anonymously sometimes on the board. And that gives the leadership an idea of like how's their team doing. In like Denali National Park, in their rangers or climbing rangers, they will each give themselves a color in the morning. And so when there's a complex mission, Tucker, who's the head ranger there, will be like, well, I'm not going to send Kakiko because he checked in as orange. I'm going to put him on a different mission and he's going to be back at base running these ops. And then I'm going to send these two rescuers because they checked in as green. And this is a very complex mission. So that is how they're using it to like decide who goes in. And then the the psychological first aid I've just been using a lot because it's just like it's been such an aha for me about that almost like scene and situational awareness of like taking a step back and being like who looking around and be like who is really freaked out in this scene right now, and who do I need to go give my breath to, and calm down and sometimes it's been me. Um, but I've learned in that by learning how to give that care to somebody else, I've actually learned that as a toolbox to myself, of working how to just like slow my own speech down and take deep breaths because the taking deep breaths is giving your nervous system a chance to regulate. Deep breathing is a regulator. And so it says like the tiger isn't chasing me right now. Like if I can stop and take 3 deep breaths, then it tells my physiological systems that the lion is not attacking me right now. If I can't do that on my own, then I'll ask for that from one of my partners. And hopefully that's where like for your expedition or whatever you're planning, you've had those conversations ahead of time. And that can be really helpful because you're utilizing tools from the same toolbox with the same language. Does that answer your question, Tuck?
Yeah, that was an awesome answer. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a similar, yeah, like Tuck, it's like, how can I pull the practical side? And one disconnect for me is there's like, there's crisis, which is like the big deal that I don't deal with very often. And
Thank
then
goodness.
there's like, yeah. And then there's the stuff that I do deal with all the time where one person in the group feels like they are the weak link holding everybody up, or I feel
Mm.
like I'm the weak link holding everybody up. So I'd love to hear how you would, yeah, both those. And when you, either as a guide or with your peer group, when you recognize that somebody's struggling, what are the
Mm.
tools you pull out? And then after that, like when you recognize that you yourself are struggling, what are the tools you pull out?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think in all my guiding years, I've guided in such a different way than the paradigm. You know, I came into the world of guiding and it was all a man's world and it was all done a very specific way. And I guided from a very like what I would call a very divine feminine, very different. And part of that was leading with vulnerability. So vulnerability breeds vulnerability, and it actually creates a safe emotional container for people to feel like they can, for people to take physical risks, they need to feel like they can take emotional risks. And
Mm,
so part of it at the beginning is that I would like lay a groundwork of like, let's everybody reach in our pockets and grab our ego and we're going to throw it over our shoulder. Because this isn't about what peaks we climb or what rapids we run. This is about a team. And we are, you know, every one of us has felt like the weak link at one point or another. It's where my biggest imposter syndrome lives, in that fear of being the weak link. And yet if I can voice it and give voice to it and even share that with my group of like, and have it open the floor to be like, what is everybody nervous about coming into this, and how would you like to be supported? Um, then I find it's amazing. It gets people out of that shame and blame place. And if I try to like see that, you know, as that person's, you know, struggling or showing up, is come in and connect, you know, and hopefully they've given you some ways to like connect with them in that space. Um, you know, whether it's giving the whole group a break so that they can catch themselves a break, you know, or whatever, but just normalizing that everyone has felt like that, and um that it's not a competition, like it's expeditions are teamwork based, and taking out like that, it's taking out the like rape, pillage, and conquer mentality of expeditions and taking it more into like it's a journey that we're on together, and nature gets to decide whether we accomplish our goals and objectives or not. It's really honestly not up to us. It's like that humility and that humbleness helps create a container within where the group can really feel like okay to not be okay, which to me is going to create the best expedition. Like where expeditions break down is where that imbalance of ego takes over, and you have one person who's like going for the gusto and they have to get to the top of the peak, whether if they have got to cut the rope or not. You know, I mean, emotionally they're cutting the rope to the people behind them, and it's like, how can we like do that preventative meds? How can we, even before going in the field, how can we build that trust, build that support network, like learning each other, do the battery recharge exercise together as a team, so you can be like, you know, who here has imposter syndrome and what helps get you to feel that normalized. And even seeing everybody's hand raised is, I did a webinar last year with a group of women who are leaders in the avalanche world. And we talked about imposter syndrome, and most of the participants who were listening in were men. And the fact that all the men were like, oh, I totally have imposter syndrome. I was like, really? You do? I never knew that men could have imposter syndrome. I was like, that's amazing. That just totally freed up my brain. I'm so excited to know that. And it just made me feel more human, you know? So sometimes when we share our scariest fears, everyone else breathes a sigh of relief, is like, oh my God, thank God that you wanted to stop and eat a snack, because I really, really was feeling tired, but I didn't want to say anything, you know?
I,
So the
I,
physical mirrors the emotional.
I love that line, how you started that to take physical risks, you have to be prepared to take emotional risks, like that you don't get one without the other.
No way.
That's cool. I've never thought of it that way. That's really cool.
Awesome. Well, I think that's not been the predominant paradigm, right? It's not how we were taught to adventure. Like myself included. It's not how I was brought up, and I've just really noticed that the coolest expeditions and the most successful expeditions I've been on has been where that emotional vulnerability is present and people have taken great risks, and then the reward is so rich.
Mm.
You know, the teams stay close for years afterwards because the memories that you build within that is monumental. They are monumental. Anyone else? Questions, curiosities, concerns, disagreements?
Yeah,
We
I
don't-
guess I got a comment, and I've done a lot of stuff solo, so I guess I missed out on all the emotional parts there of a team. But yeah, and I don't know whether to feel left out or lucky, but yeah, I'm getting older now, and I got a trip I wanna do. I got replacement parts and all, but I think I can still do it. But I'm kind of giving up on trying to do it solo, so I'm looking for competent persons to join me for 3 or 4 weeks in the Arctic Refuge on a walk and then a pack raft. Anybody that guides up that way that you could send me information on.
That is the most magical place on earth, for sure. Arctic Wild is one company that guides up there, and Alaska Alpine Adventures is another company that guides up there. And Luke, do you know there's like one other pack raft outfitter out of, I can't remember his name right now, out of Denali, but
Yeah, I got this. I got it pretty much planned, and most of it's walk until I get to the headwaters of the Irish Shack, and then my pack raft will be waiting.
yeah, that
Um,
sounds like
but
an amazing trip. And
yeah, I
Sean,
would hope
I
so.
would say that even on your solo trips, you're not like immune to, you haven't escaped the emotions. You probably have a lot of emotions going through your head on the solo ones.
Well, I'm pretty easy going. I don't take a lot of risk. Yeah, I've talked to a few people, but it's kind of hard to find a pal. Yeah, I've canceled the route 3 times, but still want to do it before I come worm food.
Russ,
So anyway,
oh,
thanks. I'll check out those outfits. Thank you.
hmm
and I can help with contact for them. A few of the folks in the class, like Michael Wald, took the course, and so you can get his contact through the forum. Um, but Russ, you got something for us?
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering, Brooke, what kind of maintenance, when you're talking about, and especially the last couple weeks, your human connection bringing you back to the green.
Uh-huh.
What, do you find yourself kind of going through different phases where you're not in the green, and like what kind of maintenance do you do to kind of to be aware of that?
Mm. That's a great question, Russ. It's one thing I noticed is I tried to list out also what my coping mechanisms were. And I found that living in a guiding culture and ski culture that I was utilizing alcohol a lot as a coping mechanism. And once I named that, I realized like, oh, that was stopping me from, I actually took it out of my program for a little bit. Like the last 6 months, I didn't drink. And it was so amazing because what it did when I took away my coping mechanism is then I was really aware and mindful, like when I would like want to drink, as just like to let off steam, sometimes to celebrate, sometimes to ritualize something, but sometimes just it was as a disconnect or a numbing tool, and just to really admit that to myself and be like, what? Like it took a lot of like mindfulness practice of checking in, and sometimes that takes like getting quiet, going within to be like, what am I actually feeling right now? Like what do I really need? And that often if you take a moment, I didn't know much about meditation, but there's so many apps these days. You can get an app that's like 10-minute meditations, and that just helped me slow my roll enough to get a little more mindful to start to get to learn myself. And start to be able to make those lists of like, what does green look like to me and what does yellow look like to me? And then like within that course, like obviously teaching was taking a ton out of me, even though the human connection was really good, but I would have to come home and hide, and for me, like a hot, long shower and really healthy, good food and a good night's sleep, like those are all like, they sound so simple, but it's amazing how easily we go away from those things or replace them with unhealthy things. We binge eat or we stay up really late partying or other things. And it's like, no, I know that if I like take a hot shower and put myself to bed and have a really healthy meal, then that will restore me in just like the basic needs, that then I will have the energy then to go back in and make human connection. So it's a lot of self-awareness and mindfulness practice, but it does again take holding the mirror up to ourselves and asking those really hard questions of like, some people cope with exercise. It doesn't have to look unhealthy to be a coping mechanism. Some people cope with going bigger on their objectives and going like taking huger risks. So it's just about asking yourself, like, why do I feel the need to push myself harder now? Like, what is that about? And that's a very common trauma response, is like, go do a 100-mile bike ride and feel pain in a different way so that you can almost escape emotional pain. And we do that a lot. That's really normal for humans to do. But it's just naming it. It is like a huge, huge eye-opening step.
I I
Thank you.
I'd like to understand more like the the physical part as a coping mechanism, but also as a healing pathway. Like, gosh, that's a hard boundary.
And I think it can be both and. Like, I don't think you
Uh,
have to like slot it in one. It's not like doing the 100-mile bike ride is bad. It's like, it's great. It's like moving endorphins through your body. Those are healthy, good ways of processing trauma and emotions. Um, it's just like asking yourself, like at the same time, like, am I running away from something?
is that what it is? So you check in and be like, what's my motivation for this level of
Yeah.
output? Uh-huh. Okay.
And if it is that you're running away from something, that can still, the answer can be yes, and it can still be okay. You can just say like, okay, well, maybe it will give me the energy then to circle back to that. If I always run away from it, it's always going to be chasing me. But if I
Mm.
like run away long enough to get fed and then circle back and sit with it and do whatever I need to do, process, talk it through with a therapist, a partner, journal about it, anything to move it through. And sometimes the act itself of riding the bike for 100 miles can move it through. It certainly works for people with grief. But where I see it get unhealthy is like, I mean, we've seen it in our community, is we've had a lot of death and loss in our community as of late in Alaska, and the community is almost split. Is like half the people are going bigger and taking bigger risks, and it's almost like it's like watching a self-destructive rocket go off, next to you. It's like, holy cow, that doesn't seem like it's like, they've always been risk takers, but now they're just like going for it in a way that feels very self-destructive. And it's almost worth like just, it's like you can go to the mountains as your healing mechanism, but are you trying to kill yourself at the same time? It's like asking those hard questions. Like, what is my, am I trying to set my own self up so that I just get wiped out by an avalanche? Or am I going here to actually connect with the mountains and heal? And it can be the same activity, different answers. We're complex little human beings, we are. It
Yeah,
ain't
I was just like, wow.
Welcome to Life Coaching 101. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Incredible.
Oh. It's just, think about it as it's a different type of expedition. Like I just had a friend the other day said she stopped calling it doing the work and she started calling it doing the inner exploration. And I was like, yeah, we're on this adventure. It's like we like are there's no Cal Topo in here. Like I wish there was a Gaia track that somebody else had laid down to figure this out. But I'm like, I'm literally like every step being like, I don't know where I am. I'm lost again, but I'll just look around. So we're creating the map ourselves. But that inner exploration, it can go so beautifully hand in hand with the outer exploration. And I think it just enriches our lives and probably makes us better humans and better backcountry partners and better, guides and teammates too. That's my hope. That's my belief system.
Patrick, did you have something?
Oh, I was gonna say I heard a saying that if you get really good at something really fast, like going back to the 100-mile bike ride, your paragliding's my big activity right now. And I was listening to a podcast. Somebody said if you get really good really fast, you're hiding from something on the ground. It seemed to kind of resonate with that. Like, oh yeah, you're out doing your 100-mile bike ride and this and that. What are you doing they're using it as a coping mechanism?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that resonated with me. It was good.
Yeah.
It was great,
And
great presentation.
Yeah, and again, I have no intention of shaming and blaming those because that's really important and those are
No,
valuable
it's
things.
yeah.
My partner does 100-mile bike rides. That's where I get the, but he's the first to admit like that he knows that is a mechanism for him and that's part of his inner exploration, but he can name it, so it's
Yeah. And I think it's also, I've come to the realization too, well, okay, I'm progressing slower at this than someone else, but there's a lot of other things going on in my life too. So I'm intentionally, even though I'm a very competitive person, I'm okay. Like if I gave up everything else, I could get really good really fast, but I'm not. So, that's kind of it put things into perspective there a little bit.
And another great thinker, Brene Brown, said comparison is the thief of joy. So there will always be somebody who's radder than you and goes bigger and goes harder and is more fit, always.
Yeah.
So it's like you are you, be in your joy. Yeah. I have
Enjoy
to
what you're doing while
do
you're
that
doing
to
it.
myself all the time.
Good point.
We have done this thing that we usually do where it's a male dominated question session. And so I just want to take a moment in case any women would like to ask anything. No pressure. I usually put my mom on the spot. My mom's here. Tina, you got something for me?
Yeah, I've been wondering about something.
Good.
Like, so for me, the trips that I do, there's not that much environmental hazard. It's more like risk of people. So I travel with a bicycle a lot, like during Africa and stuff. And so it's like getting robbed, getting stuff like that. And so at one point in Tanzania, someone tried to rob me. And I was at a point, at an intersection where I was deciding, do I go south? This is like a dirt road and there's not a lot of traffic. But a place I've been wanting to go for a very long time. And every time I'm in Tanzania, it's like red area, like they advise against traveling there. And at that point it was green. And so this thing had happened and I got really scared, to be honest. Like it freaked me out, like my own reaction freaked me out because I didn't just hand over the phone that he wanted because there were a picture on it and I didn't put it on the cloud. I really don't care about the damn phone, but so you kind of experience your own reaction to stuff. And so when this happened, he didn't rob me. I got to a hotel safely and I like barricaded myself in there. And at that point I had to decide, like, do I take the risky route that I've been planning on or do I divert? And it was a really difficult decision because at that point I didn't want to give in, like you were saying, like you just suck it up and you go on. And it just really felt like if right now I decide to not take the more risky path, then I'm doing it because I'm afraid. And so it took me like 2 or 3 days to kind of find my balance, like, if I don't go, is it because I'm afraid? And if I'm afraid, is this the right decision? Is it because I'm in the red zone? Or if I go into the confrontation, it will be okay. It's just my stretch zone. Or so that was a difficult decision to make. And it's
Oh.
but do you have any tips to deal with that? Because for me, it feels like it's just trial and error. You just kind of have to.
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that happened to you. And I feel like that is one difference of the experience of being a woman in the world is that we do have to we engage with humans as predators so much more than men and feel that fight or flight so many more situations, like sadly. So I just want to honor and recognize that that's real and it's a real difference that the genders experience. And I think that it was awesome that you spent 3 days, because that 3 days, like, of course you went into fight or flight. And freeze, like, I don't want to give you my phone because I have all my memories on here, of course. And so I love that you just like, you went back to an island of safety and you barricaded yourself in, because that's what we need to do, right? We need to come back into safety and ground and allow like those 3 days to pass, that's normal physiological, like you aren't going to get a correct answer. No, there's no like way to discern, because you're like, the lion is still chasing you for 3 days. And until that passes, to be able to really check in and be like, what do I really, really want? And then to give yourself grace. Like, if it's okay to be too scared to go on. It's okay. Nobody's going to call you a wimp or tell you that you failed because you turned around or whatever. Like, I've canceled whole trips because, I've been attacked in some way and been like, I'm out, and, I most recently this summer was riding a public bus and 7 different men like accosted me, and I ended up got off the bus and like ran into a park and called my sister. My sister like drove across the state to come get me because I was like such a mess. And it had happened on the heels of some other bad stuff that had happened to me, that where I had no bandwidth left, that I was like, I think I was putting out prey vibes, that I just couldn't believe that I was just like, but it's because I hadn't stopped from the incident before to like reground myself. And so I went into this like public bus scene emitting prey vibes and trying to suck it up and deal. And I was like, I just was more victim. I was like attracting victimhood, and it's like I had to get rescued out of there. And then I went and lived at my mom's house for 3 weeks and was like, nobody can find me in here, until I could like really calm down, and it's like, it is a real deal thing that we have to confront in the world, particularly as female participants on this planet. And it is unfortunate. And Luke was actually one of the people who came to my emotional rescue during that, because I think I put on social media, like, man, I have a great ask of you, like, to just notice when there's a woman being heckled or harassed, like, can you figure out a way to come forward and be an advocate and an ally and a safe island in that? Because there was other nice men on this bus and nobody noticed, and Luke was really great in reaching out to me and being like, you're right, like, we need to pay attention more, and what can I do to pay attention more? And I just really appreciate that, as like all of us on the planet, whether it's an act of racism or violence towards women or somebody of a different color or gender or sexual orientation, it's like, how can we notice when somebody else is going into fight or flight and come in there to be that psychological first response for them and de-escalate provide that island of safety to allow their nervous system to like breathe for a second. So I think that would be a ask of everybody in this group, just in your normal day-to-day. It's like field situational awareness. So thank you,
Thank you.
You went from here on my screen to over there. I was like, where'd she go? You got on your bike and you went elsewhere.
Yeah, I think for me that's a big question, because it feels like it's a cultural thing as well, that you need to feel more vulnerable as a woman, while men can get robbed as well. So there is this whole, even as a kid, you're being like, your mind is, I don't know the correct English word, but you get this input of you're more vulnerable, or you should be more scared, or you shouldn't do these things. So there is this whole battle going on, like, is this the kind of fear that I need to listen to because it is a very important signal not to be ignored? Or is this something, a boundary that I don't want to accept because it is limiting me and it is not a real boundary? And so that whole exercise, finding balance between that, well, it's a journey as well. Yeah.
It's a huge journey and one I've been wrestling with my whole life. And I feel like every country you go to, it's different, right? You know, it's like, and just even in this country of like, you know, if we dare to show up in all of our power, how that can be weaponized against you sometimes, you know. So it's interesting, but I support you in getting, you know, like it's there is no answer. It's like women should be emboldened to ride their bicycle across Africa, you know. It's like that there shouldn't be a like, oh, you shouldn't do that, that's not safe. It's like, why can't you? You can, you know. It's like, and unfortunately there's different awarenesses that you have to be able to accomplish that goal in a different way than say Luke would have to have awarenesses. And just as Luke could get just as easily robbed, but maybe come out of it less scared, maybe come out of it same scared, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like looking like, is this a confrontation I need to go into, or is it a good thing to pull back and to say, no, I'm not moving forward. And so that's a real search. Yeah. But thanks.
Yeah. And self-grace again and again, like asking ourselves, like, where is that pressure coming from? Is it pressure to prove ourselves to somebody, or our childhood coming up again because we wanted to prove to our parents that we were good enough? You know, like I ask those questions of myself when I'm asking, like, do I want to keep with the bike ride or not? I'm like, well, is it the little kid in me that wanted approval that thinks that I have to go? Like, and what would it look like if I just said no and gave myself grace and went back? And is that okay? You know, and I want to offer that it's always okay. You're all everybody here is enough. You know, there's nothing that anybody has to prove to anyone. Like we were born enough. We are enough. It's the narratives in our head that tell us that we should or shouldn't keep going on whatever objective we're doing.
And the narratives from the media and the culture, like it's not all in the head. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and social media is the worst now
Yeah.
too. Yeah, we're so pressured to, like, you will be accepted once you climb Everest. Yeah, and celebrated. And the fascinating thing about my friend who died, Kasha Rigby, is that she had climbed 8,000-meter peaks around the world and had expedition with Jimmy Chin and Kit Delorier and Hillary O'Neill, like for 20 years as a sponsored North Face athlete. And what was super cool to me about, like, so she impacted the whole world because she was like the first woman to telemark ski off these peaks. And so when all the news media outlets, Backcountry Magazine, Outside Magazine, everybody was talking about, like, you know, Choya Oyu and all these peaks that she'd done in Pakistan, the Himalaya. And then when like Jimmy Chin came out and just like was interviewed about it, he was like, yes, she could do those things, but why we wanted Kasha on the expedition is because she had sparkle magic, and she was so sweet and so kind, and she'd pour everybody a cup of tea, and you know, sometimes she wouldn't go with us to the top, but she'd have the wands out for us on the way back, and she'd always be there with like having like put up the prayer flags around our tent. Like she was such a radiant, joyous human being that like the impact she made on the world was because of the way she made people feel. It wasn't because of the peak she climbed. And to me, that was like, holy cow, like what a gift. What a gift to have us all learn. It's beautiful.
That was beautiful. Mom, I'm going to put you on the spot so you give a 1-minute warning. She gave us a banger closing sentiment last time. So we'll see if we can get another one from her. Any Any other questions in our last minutes? Tina, I'm really glad that you asked that one. It makes me think about, like, I've heard people talk about healthy fear versus unhealthy fear. I think different ways to say what you said. And that's something I've really struggled with, like specifically for me in the avalanche terrain. It's like, am I just trying to avoid this because I can't deal with it, or because it's actually out to get me? And I'm still trying to figure that out.
Well, and I'll summarize that with like that to me, when I was dealing with that chronic stress injury, is like after 30 years of making life and death decisions for other people and watching, people die around me. It was like holding my breath, walking through a minefield while people are exploding. And it was never on my watch. I was never there. So I just kept downplaying it. Like, well, I wasn't there. It didn't happen to me, so I couldn't be harmed, but it was like incrementally loading until I was like chronically stress injured, and where I was so hyper vigilant where I couldn't discern. I was like, and I had to have somebody be like, your brain is so much in fight or flight that you're putting like there's 80% of these fears that you're making up to avoid it, and this bucket over here is overflowing, and then there's 20% of the fear that is like actually purposeful fear that is serving, like that is actually real, like that you should be paying attention to with your risk mitigation. But I was so chronically stress injured that I couldn't figure out, and I'd ask myself, like, is this in the 80% bucket or the 20% bucket? And I couldn't, while I was in that state, I couldn't figure it out, and I feel like I'm slowly making my way towards like discernment in those buckets. But I love thinking about it like that, is like when I'm feeling hypervigilant and can only see the imminent disaster syndrome, like I joke that I have imminent disaster syndrome, like that I'm like, I make my mantra is like, what if I imagine the best case scenario? Now, what are the fears that still remain? And then there's the 20% that filters out. If I imagine the best case scenario, all the like 80% of like hyper arousal and hypervigilance,
Hmm.
it like
Hmm.
goes over here.
Hmm.
And then I'm like, okay, I do need to pay attention to that strainer, but
Hmm.
there's clearly a path over here. And if I aim for that path, then it's all gonna work out just fine. You
That's
know?
that's helpful. Yeah, I like that. And I like the word purposeful. I hadn't thought of that, purposeful fear instead of unhealthy.
Because it's there to serve us. Like we have to make friends with it. We can't shame our fear. Like fear is what keeps us alive. We need it. And so we have to hold hands with it.
Yeah. Okay, Mom, you ready?
What one of my thoughts throughout this was that I kept thinking of people that I know who I would say are in a chronic state of reacting and injured,
Mhm.
and that they are so rarely in the green.
Yeah.
And they're people that, and certainly I have periods of time, excluding myself, but people where it's become their personality.
Mhm.
And that they, you talk about, well, like with Tina, what are my motivations, and I want to do this, but am I doing it for the right reasons? Well, what if you're so deeply in a reacting or injured state that you can't think that through? You can't take the 3 days that are required. And when you're in a crisis situation in the outdoors and you don't have time, can you answer that? What if you don't have time to regroup? What what's your advice with that?
Thank you for asking that. I think that I learned this the hard way, is that I had 30 years of that incremental learning and that chronic stress injury where I just felt more and more terrified to do my job, and I couldn't take the 3 days. I literally was stuck in fight or flight for years and years, but I didn't know. So I had been that girl you're talking about. I had been that person. I never slept. Insomnia was just my normal state of being. So I'd normalized all of it, and it took me being like a helicopter crashing with a bunch of my friends in it. And then I had to get in a helicopter and guide people in the same manner 5 minutes later. And I acutely stress injured myself. And then I blew out my knee because there's like only so much you can take before your like universe is like, we're just gonna sweep you at the legs and just we're gonna slow you down, we're gonna lay you down. And it was then that I was like, a friend of mine was like, Brooke, you're slowly killing yourself. Like this, and they gave me the language. Like I had no idea. I didn't know that I just thought I chose a profession that you just like just mentally health screw yourself for the rest of your life. I don't know. And I kept shaming myself like I suck at this. I'm a horrible guide. Like I can't like do any, I couldn't find joy anymore, even in my own activities. Like I was jealous of people going whitewater rafting. I was like, oh, they're giggling when whitewater, don't they know whitewater can kill you? You know, it's like, I don't understand how people can still have fun skiing steep things, you know? And I was like, I'd lost all of my connection to joy. And it really took somebody telling me that like what I was experiencing was an actual physical injury. And once I knew that, then I could work towards getting better. I've spent 2 years in therapy and doing somatic therapy and doing EMDR and doing brain spotting and trying all these. There's so many cool modalities now to work with our nervous system. People are using hallucinogens in guided ways, and there's ketamine clinics, and I even tried a like vagal nerve block to like restart my fight or flight mechanism, you know, but and I'm a totally different human now than I was 2 years ago. I'm so different. And I sleep now and I can breathe. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And now I'm like transitioning my whole career. I want to do this work. Like I want to spread the good word. Like I want people to know because I just didn't know. I didn't have the language. And I think our whole culture is at this tipping point. We've had this stigma around mental health. And I'm like, no, we need to think about this differently. We need to think about this absolutely differently. Like everybody could use this. If we think about it, like if we know that it's a part of our bodily systems, and then we recognize the symptoms in each other and you let folks know that there's a way out. Like we don't have to live in fight or flight. You don't have to live in that state of stress. It's okay to like come down. But I just didn't know. Like that's part of why I'm here today. It's like just to give you guys like that opening keys to the toolbox. It's like first is the language, like normalizing, like you're normal, like you've all experienced this in different ways. I guarantee it doesn't take long to reflect back on every single one of you has more than one story. You're
Awesome.
normal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brooke.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to honor our time-ish. We're a little late, but allow everybody a graceful exit here. Thanks so much, Brooke. That was a great fit for some gaps in our coverage and conversations. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and the invitation. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to be here.
Brooke, that was wonderful.
Thank you,
so much.
Brooke.
Yeah, and I'm always here as a
Yeah,
resource.
thank
And Luke, if you want to share my email with folks, like people can follow up with any questions.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
And Brooke, I'll give you a call here in a second when I close
Okay.
this down.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.